Magic players, my name is Jesse and welcome back to another episode of the Mythic Tutor, the YouTube channel designed to help you improve your play on Arena by walking you through how to pilot each of the best decks available so you can either understand how to pilot them yourself or how best to beat them. Before we get into this next episode, I'd like to just put a quick reminder out there that if you found any of these series of videos helpful, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel, as it'd be really helpful in getting this young YouTube channel off the ground. Now, over the last few episodes, we've covered some decks whose archetypes have existed across most of Historic, even if the individual cards have changed over time. But with today's episode, we're going to be piloting a deck that essentially burst onto the scene with the release of Modern Horizons 3. It's called Boros Energy, and if you spent any time at all playing Historic Best of 1, you've certainly come across it. It's a very flexible and resilient deck that still provides a ton of pressure even in the early game, and as such has favorable matchups with all but a couple of decks in the format. To handle those two decks, we've added a couple of tech cards. Now, the deck already has been targeted with some adjustments on Historic, but still punches above its weight class, given its super efficient mana curve and ease of mulligans, as it functions very well on just a few lands. So the deck style that you like to play is adaptive and interactive, but with a mix of aggressive elements, Boros Energy just might be the deck for you. Or perhaps you're watching this because what you want to learn is specifically how to target this deck to better understand its weaknesses against your deck of choice. In either case, if you want to better understand what I think is currently the premier deck in Historic Best of 1, let's jump on in. So in this past month, I switched to Boros Energy in about the last week and a half of the season. The meta has adjusted a bit to the rebalance in Historic, and so while there isn't as much of representation of Boros Energy in the meta right now, that actually helps with our success rate. Now, back at the end of July and the beginning of August, you either played Boros Energy yourself, or you played something specifically designed to beat it. Usually that was Charbelcher or Reanimator, which were covered in our last couple of videos. But now as the meta has shifted a bit, there's a much wider variety of decks you'll find your opponents playing, and that really opens Boros Energy up to be successful. Because of that, I was able to vault from the low 500s in Mythic to finishing at 158 last month, and I think it's a good choice for trying to get to Mythic this month too. Before making this video, I actually shared this list with a few players that I know from Paper Magic. They were looking to get into Arena with something they could pilot, and I think their testimonial really tells the story well. As they started with this deck from Bronze, the first one said this: "This deck is in easy mode up to Platinum. In Platinum, you're still playing with a huge advantage, but losing finally becomes a possibility if you really mess it up." Another one followed up his second trip to Platinum with this: "Man, I made it back to Platinum pretty easily." And finally, my favorite text about the deck: "Jesse, this deck is dumb," with 10 exclamation points. They're each well on the way to Mythic this month as well. So what makes this deck tick? Unlike some of the other decks that we've played, it's not a 1 or 2 card combo that outright wins the game. Instead, it's a deck that continuously tries to accrue value over time as the game progresses. That said, there are a handful of cards that really make the deck work well, and these are the cards you'll want to prioritize in your opening hand. First, from Modern Horizons 3 is Guide of Souls. It's a 1-mana 1/2 that gains you a life and an energy whenever a creature enters the side of the battlefield. Then, when you attack, you can pay 4 energy to put 2 +1/+1 counters on an attacking creature, and a flying counter, really helping to get in over the top to finish off a game. Next, you have A-Ocelot Pride from Modern Horizons 3 also, which is currently a 2-mana 1/1 with First Strike, that if at the end of your turn, if you gain life during that turn, you create a 1/1 cat token. Then, if you have the City's Blessing, which is 10 or more permanents, you create a copy of every token that entered the battlefield on your side of the field that turn, including the 1/1 cat that you just made. Just those 2 cards working together can get out of hand really quickly. Adding in the next key card is Ajani Nacatl Pariah, which is also from Modern Horizons 3. It's a 2-mana creature that when it enters, it creates a 2/1 cat token. Whenever any cat dies, you may flip it into its Planewalker's form, where it starts making more tokens and potentially shoots down your opponent's board. It also has the ability to put a +1/+1 counter on all the cats that you control for +2, and for -4, it can make your opponent choose a creature, artifact, enchantment, and planeswalker that they control, and sacrifice each other non-land permanent they control, which can be devastating against the right kind of matchup. Finally, the last key card that can turn all these tokens and creatures into a win is Goblin Bombardment, which originally released in Tempest, but was released in Historic along with Wild of Eldraine. Goblin Bombardment has been the key to a number of combo decks over the course of the last 17 years that it's been around, and it's a 2-mana red enchantment that lets you sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. But really it's the way that these 4 cards work together that make the deck super potent. Before we jump into Arena, this deck actually runs a little bit lighter on wildcards than some of the others we've shown, especially if you go budget on the lands. The current build of the deck list we're playing today requires 10 common wildcards, 11 uncommon wildcards, 26 rare wildcards, of which 12 are lands, and 8 mythic wildcards, bringing it to an overall wildcard score of 44.2, or really middle of the pack. Now, to make sure we've covered all of our bases and to take a look at some of the cards I didn't include that you might want to consider, let's get into sample deck list on Arena. So the first thing to notice is we're using Lurrus as our companion in this build, giving us the ability to essentially reuse anything that gets put into our graveyard in a long game. However, this does restrict us in that all the permanent cards in our deck must have a mana cost of 2 or less. Given that, the next thing you'll notice is that nothing at all in the deck costs more than 2 mana, keeping the overall curve extremely efficient. This build is running 4 copies of Guide of Souls, 3 copies of Esper Sentinel, 2 copies of Jolted Awake, 3 copies of Static Prison, and 4 copies of Galvanic Discharge for our removal. In the 2 mana slot, we're running 4 copies of Ajani, Nacatl, Pariah, we're running 4 copies of A-Ocelot Pride, and 4 copies of what I think is the most important flex tech card in this deck, Thraben Charm. As you'll see later in the sideboard choices, there are a handful of things that really give this deck some fits. One of them is quick reanimation, which Thraben's Charm can prevent by exiling their library with its 3rd ability. Another is an opponent with Goblin Bombardment or Leyline of Resonance or some other meaningful enchantment, which can be destroyed using its 2nd ability. And finally, some decks are able to get large enough creatures that we just can't threaten them. Thraben's Charm's 1st ability gives us the power to turn our wide collection of tokens into powerful removal. The card really is an all-star right now. We're also running 4 copies of Amped Raptor, which essentially allows us to 2 for 1 each time we cast it. It nets us a 1st strike creature that's a red permanent for Ajani, and usually gets us another useful spell essentially for free. The final 2 cards in the 2 mana slot are Goblin Bombardment, of which I'm running 4, but you may see some decks that run less, and 2 copies of Lightning Helix. I think Lightning Helix really helps in the mirror match right now, but if you don't want to spend rare wildcards on it, it's okay to add more Static Prisons or Jolted Awakes instead. As for lands, we're running 1 each of Eiganjo and Sokenzan as flexible channel lands, and then a relatively generic set of red and white lands. These could easily be replaced with lands that you already have within your collection, but I would certainly prioritize lands that come in untapped. Finally, we have 4 copies of Aether Hub, which can add a few extra energy while still giving us some mana flexibility. In the sideboard, I've listed some cards that you will likely see in other Boros Energy builds that didn't quite make the cut in my version, and I'll explain why. First is the Authority of the Consuls. While it can be really helpful to gain life and slow down your opponent in the mirror match, it doesn't really advance our game plan enough. If the meta shifts back to being primarily Boros Energy, this is definitely a good card to bring back. Legion's Landing is more or less the same idea. It gives you some incremental additional life gain to help power up your other abilities, but it really only belongs in a mono white life gain deck. Surgical Extraction was very important when our main threat in the meta was Reanimator only, but now we generally stick to Thraben's Charm instead for the additional flexibility. If you find that you run into a lot of Reanimator decks or Shifting Woodlands decks, throw some of these in there in place of Static Prison and Jolted Awake. Pithing Needle is specifically for Goblin Charbelcher. Charbelcher is easily our worst matchup, but unless we start seeing a lot of it, we shouldn't be teching for it, as this card is essentially dead in other situations. Invasion of Gobakhan earned a spot here when it was more aggro focused, and it gave your creatures hexproof and indestructible potentially, but now it's just a bit too slow compared to our other options. Finally, Rest in Peace serves the same purpose as Surgical Extraction. As for some other cards, Leon and Vanguard really shows up in a lot of lists as a cat that gains life, so it triggers both A-Ocelot Pride and Ajani. However, I'm not included in my build as I found additional removal to be more valuable against other decks similar to ours and decks like Mono Green Devotion. Mana Tithe can be really helpful against some combo decks, but it really doesn't progress our game plan most of the time, so right now it didn't make the cut. Soul Warden and Voice of the Blessed are 2 classics of mono white life gain decks, but our goal with this deck isn't really to amass a huge amount of life, and Soul Warden doesn't really do enough on its own. Voice of the Blessed being 2 white also can be tough to cast, but more importantly it doesn't interact with our opponents enough. Felia is a good thing to consider if the meta goes more mid-range or if you expect to get into more control matchups and longer games. The flash ability and the ability to remove something like High Noon just for your turn can really unlock the ability for you to overcome the advantage that control decks may have against you. But right now, I just don't see enough of that. Unstable Amulet allows just a little bit of extra damage over time and some additional access to cards, but I've found that it uses our energy a bit inefficiently, and since the card rebalance of Guide of Souls, it's been out of my main list. Finally, Flage is a great card for a more long game focused build, but it would also require us to give up Lurrus as our companion, and I think that we just can't justify that swap. So with that out of the way, let's get into some games. Alright, so this opening hand gets us both of our colors, has some removal and an Amped Raptor. We have a ton of removal actually with the Lightning Helix. Let's go for it. I think we're not going to use the Static Prison on their Esper Sentinel because it would just net them a card. So instead we're going to wait a turn and see what happens. Yeah, that's a much better target to use our Static Prison against. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll pay for Esper. And now we'll have enough energy from these two Raptors to kind of keep paying for this, to keep this Sorin off the board. Ajani. Yeah, we're gonna have to kill that.
We have peace.
I think we're gonna just run out our own Raptor here. See what we get into. Our own Ajani. That's good.
To the hunt!
So this isn't quite a mirror match because they're added black, so they're doing a few different things, but more or less the same idea of a deck. Alright, they have now tapped out, which may allow us to kill their Ajani. We're going to let that through so we don't flip theirs. Okay, I really want to cast 2 spells this turn, so as much as I'd like to save this for something later, I'll go ahead and do that. We'll let them draw a card to hit their Ajani. Do not pay. Then let's get in for some damage with our cat, as they likely will not block it as well. Yeah, and then we're going to kill our own cat with our Lightning Helix. So, gain some life, we're going to flip our Ajani, we're going to kill their A-Ocelot Pride, and net another creature on board.
A dark plot tied shared in my vengeance.
Alright, that really turned things around for us a bit. Again, having that extra pieces of removal with the double Lightning Helix helps us out a lot in any sort of mirror match kind of situation. Now they're growing into a pretty big board, but they don't have their Ajani anymore, so we can block their cats or do whatever else. They can swing 3 creatures at ours. I think we're just gonna block with our cat to not lose our red permanent, since we can just make more. Yeah, go ahead. Cool. So let's kill their Esper Sentinel and then block with our cat. This way we'll keep our Raptor and keep our Ajani. We'll just get 1, assuming they don't finish it off with a burn spell.
An invitation from grandfather? Curious.
Now we can probably just kill it, depending on what happens with the Raptor. Let's play that. That's fine. Sure. Yeah, that'll work. So let's do this to kill that Sorin. Do this.
To me!
I think we want to kill One of their first strikers. Yeah, get him for 2. We're going to get into top deck mode against them a little bit here. Hopefully having Lurrus will have a bit of an advantage. This is one of the cards they've added added black to get access to, which essentially is their way of trying to do well against a mirror match, right? If you heist my library playing essentially the same deck as I am, you're going to run into cards that are useful.
This plot goes deeper than I imagined.
Okay, yeah, so we're going to add Lurrus to our hand. Hopefully next turn we can cast Lurrus and Ajani. And the other benefit of having Lurrus is that the Static Prison, we can kind of start looping over time if we want to. So we can use this here. Let's hit their Raptor. And now we can get in with both of our Raptors. Yeah, it's gonna be a problem. Fortunately, they only have 2 creatures right now, but it does make doing Lurrus Ajani things more difficult. Yeah, we'll pay for that. Now we can kill their Soul Warden, which just means that they're gonna sack it to kill one of our Raptors or our Esper Sentinel. But that's really fine, because then we can do the Lurrus and Ajani thing again. Yeah, okay, so they sacked it to kill a Raptor, which makes that fizzle, which is fine, but they only have 1 creature now, so we're going to get some value out of this. We'll cast Ajani this turn. The other choice would have been to cast another copy of Static Prison to hit their Goblin Bombardment. That would probably been a bit more conservative of a play. But I do think it would be helpful here.
Right beside me,
just
brother.
Kind of add additional threats to the board. Yeah, so now they can't block the cat because Ajani will flip again. Well, maybe they will. We don't know what's in their hand. I guess they could block the cat here and then kill the Raptor without killing our cat. That's fine. So now we're both on top deck mode, but unless they draw something to remove our Lurrus, we're going to accrue too much value for them to really deal with over time. Yeah, that's going to be a forfeit for them. So essentially they didn't draw anything there to deal with our Lurrus, and they knew that we were going to be able to Static Prison their Goblin Bombardment again. We probably could have just dropped this Static Prison next turn and got whatever other threats they had out of the way, and just continued to accrue value and hit them with our cats. So really shows what the deck can do. Bill Clinton. Okay, so this opening hand gets us both of our colors, an Esper Sentinel to potentially draw some cards, several pieces of removal, and a Goblin Bombardment. We're kind of missing Guide of Souls or Ajani, but I think we're still going to take this given our ability to remove their things and hopefully draw some cards. Plus we get to go first, which is kind of nice. The only negative for this is if this ends up being a Charbelcher deck we're going up against, we don't really have the speed to challenge their ability to win. But assuming they're not on that, we should be in good shape. Okay, so this is likely a Boros Convoke kind of deck, which does have the ability to really go wide against us. So we're going to try to race a little bit. We'll kill this Inspector. On the next turn, they're likely going to destroy this artifact to make 3 1/1s, which again is a bit difficult for us to deal with our current board state. We would prefer to have a lot more creatures to be able to block and still be threatening. Okay. let's do our Goblin Bombardment here, and then I think we want to static prison that clue. That seems like a waste, but if it turns them off of 3/1/1 tokens, that's really what they're trying to do. Plus, this isn't going to cost us any more energy since that's just gone now. Yeah, okay. We're going to get to it anyway. Corner. With an Esper Sentinel and a static prison in the yard, I think we want to get Luris here and see if we can get a few more turns out of this game. The nice thing is that if we were to draw an Ajani here, with the Goblin Bombardment already out, we'd be in pretty good shape. Yeah, that's fine. We got another one in our hand. The other benefit of them swinging in with a bunch of 1/1 tokens is that Luris can block them. So this is going to let us cast Luris. Let's cast Prison here. We'll take out a token, and we can sacrifice it and cast it again next turn if we'd like to. And then we're going to discharge this Inspector. And against most decks, you're going to want to use these instants on your opponent's turn. But a lot of what this deck is trying to do is have a bunch of creatures and then convoke them to cast bigger things. So a lot of times we want to cast our removal on our turn instead to make it more difficult for them to cast them. So here they have the 5, so they theoretically could cast that big Knight of Eos, but depends on if they have it or not. So here we can again decline. And if we want to, we can cast it again. We might cast this Esper Sentinel instead. No, let's just keep doing that. So get rid of another token. And we'll hold up our Luris to block. So now we're going up basically top deck mode against another deck that runs super lean on lands. Now we've drawn 6 somehow, given that we started with just 2. It's a little extreme, but they've only drawn 2, which was kind of the other end of the spectrum there. So assuming we can get into some valuable usable cards instead of lands, we should be in pretty good shape. The things that we're trying to do are a bit more valuable than what they're trying to do. And see, they really can't swing into us with the 1/1s because they're just going to give us 3 life with Luris. Just hit another token, I think. Since they have both the Clue and the Ornithopter, they have an option for destroying an artifact if they want to, so it really doesn't make much of a difference to hit the Clue right now. Really just trying to get in some more cards. That's why this Esper Sentinel is really helpful here. Granted, most of their spells are creatures. They do have these Golgotha Rebirths and this Requisition Raid, but they're playing a lot of creatures. Okay, so we are going to draw a card. They're going to add some counters, which is fine. Alright, so that's going to get harder to block. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm just going to go ahead and take all of that. I'm going to play the Pride here. And then play the Bombardment. Swing in with Luris, which will gain us some life, which will make us some tokens that we can sack to the Bombardment. But we're still going to take some more damage next turn, so we'll see how it goes. Here we go, here comes a Convoke dude. Yep. Okay, fortunately they only hit 1 card with that. Don't know if that means there's a bunch of lands on top of their deck, which is fine, but it's okay. Yeah, if they swing with all but 1, then we can use Static Prison. Yeah, so here we go. Let's block here, and then we're going to sacrifice 2 of them to kill a token. Actually, we're going to kill this Epicure. And we're doing this knowing that we can recast Static Prison to get rid of this Knight Errant, to then allow us to get in for some more lifelink damage. To get back, hopefully, close to where their life total is. Oh, this is great. Okay, cool. So we'll do this here. That's going to start gaining its life as creatures start to enter. The Static Prison will hit that Knight Errant. And then again, we can attack with Lurrus and the Ocelot Pride with no blockers. We're going to hold up Esper Sentinel block. Yeah, let's gain some more life. That's a very large Ocelot Pride. Then we're going to make a couple more tokens to sack to Bombardment. And hopefully get to a position where we're ahead of where they can really get. There we go. Yeah. So again, just building up too much. Our pieces are more powerful than theirs coming down. Boros Convoke is really going to try to kill us before we get things going. And adding Lurrus there allowed us to use our value over and over and over again. Keeping them on the board was important. Okay, yeah, this is a great opening hand. So we have a piece of removal on turn 1, a piece of removal later. We have Ajani and Ocelot Pride, and all of our colors. Now, typically, I don't like to play Ajani unless I have the ability to flip it either in hand or on board. So what that usually means is waiting until we have a Goblin Bombardment, or in this case, waiting until turn 3, to where we can cast Ajani, let it sit there, and then if we need to, Galvanic Discharge our own cat. So likely, depending on what happens on their turn, we're going to play Ocelot Pride before Ajani anyway. You may decide to play a bit differently, but it's a bit more conservative this way. Yeah, we're going to let that live, that's fine. This is probably some kind of similar deck to ours, but it's going to use Cauldron Familiar. And maybe even Samwise. So there's a black, red, white, green version of this deck that tries to combo with Samwise Gamgee, the sack outlet like Goblin Bombardment, and Cauldron Familiar, while still trying to accrue the same sorts of things that we are. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. We don't have a red permanent for Ajani, so while flipping Ajani would be neat, I don't know that it would be enough right now. So we're going to cast this Esper Sentinel, and then we're going to Lightning Helix the Guided Souls. This gains some life, which makes us a token. Village right, yeah. Deadly Dispute one of their creatures. Draws us a card. That's nice, thank you. Chthonian Nightmare and Ocelot Pride. Alright, so we might be in a bit of trouble here. We don't want them to be able to combo loop with Chthonian Nightmare, though it is gone now. I want to get rid of the Amped Raptor. So a lot of what it tries to do is loop with the Raptor, which gives it 2 energy when it enters, even when it doesn't enter using, you know, from your hand, so you don't get the additional card cast.
Nothing can.
Then here, we'll definitely attack with that cat. Since we have a first strike, we'll attack with that cat. They likely don't want to let us flip Ajani, but if they do want to trade 2 of their guys for our Ocelot Pride, we can live with that. Okay, 2 land, that's good. Now in this case, we're going to flip Ajani and put counters on our dudes.
We need all the strength we can muster.
Simply because we don't have a red permanent to trigger the damage right now. Yeah, so that gives his flow to 5, which kept him alive for an extra 10 here. Yeah, we'll pay that. Play another one of these to get rid of that flyer. And then do one of these to get rid of this Guide of Souls. And I think I want to add Luris to my hand, so we'll do that. And then now, let's see. We don't have Guide of Souls anymore. I think we just want to go a bit wider. So we'll make a cat, even though we're not going to get the damage trigger for it.
Or join our cause!
Sing in with this cat here. We really could use an Amped Raptor or a Goblin Bombardment. Either of those would make a huge difference for us. Well, they got one. Raptor, cool. Okay, let's pay for both of these this turn, and then we'll make a decision next time. Ah, now we got both of them. That's perfect. Okay, so now they can kill this Raptor to turn off the damage, but with the Goblin Bombardment, we'll be in pretty good shape. They're going to have to, yeah. I was going to say, either they sacrifice all their creatures to kill our Ajani now, which we then just recast with our Luris, or they, just try to wait us out, which isn't going to work. Okay, again, both of our colors. We have Ajani and Guide of Souls and A-Ocelot Pride and Amped Raptor and a piece of removal. This is basically a perfect opening hand. Yeah, we're just going to go for it. Again, the deck just runs so lean that so many of your opening hands work really well. Obviously, you can end up in a spot where you have just a bunch of removal and nothing else, or not the right colors, but that's really going to be infrequent. Okay, looks like they're on some sort of reanimator, so we're going to need to find a Thraben Charm pretty quick. Okay, shifting woodlands, which hopefully means we have an extra turn or two. Let's shock this in, because our life total doesn't matter. The A-Ocelot Pride, and start attacking. So we'll gain us some life, make us a token. Hopefully we can get outgoing before they do Vampire's Vengeance or something against us here. Alright, now this is going to feel a bit like a waste, but I promise you it makes sense in the long run. We're going to Static Prison this 0/1 Eldrazi spawn, because they have enough in their graveyard that if in their hand is a Shifting Woodlands, they could have activated it that turn. Let's play this Aether Hub. I really would like to get a Goblin Bombardment, so we're going to wait on Ajani for now. Plus, if we flip into Thraben's Charm, might as well use it. Okay, this is good. Vampire's Vengeance would ruin our day right now, so we're going to use our 4 energy on this A-Ocelot Pride here, so that they may be able to wipe most of our board, but we'll still have that Ocelot there. They really have to draw that now, though, or they're going to get toast next turn. Let's see if they have it. We're essentially just unobstructed with that pretty good opening hand, which again just lets these things run wild. If they don't remove the A-Ocelot Pride quickly, there's very little they can do. So they're going to get another blocker here. There's that Vampire's Vengeance, so they would have rather that be in hand. Another one in the yard here. Yeah, I think they're dead. Okay, so if they can get another turn somehow, they do have their Shifting Woodlands, but I don't see that happening. Let's see, we might just not have enough. Let's see. We got 3, we got 6, 7, 13. Yeah, we can get enough through here. That's good. Let's do this, just in case.
Where shall we hunt today?
We're going to have to swing all out, though, and we're going to have to use 4 energy to turn one of our dudes into a 3/3 flyer. just enough. Yeah, right at 0. Perfect. Yeah, so we didn't draw Thraben's Charm, which if we did, we could have just sort of sat on it until they tried to activate Shifting Woodlands, at which point they likely would have scooped. But even without that, we were able to just ramp out value fast enough. As it turns out, using that Static Prison was actually super valuable. We don't know if they had another copy of Shifting Woodlands in their hand before, but if they did, they had all the pieces that they would have needed in here to try to win the game, right? They have God Pharaoh's Statue, Omniscience, so they could turn God Pharaoh's Statue into something and get this onto the battlefield. They could have done Omniscience and play the cards that are in their hand. We saw this Malevolent Rumble, we saw Traverse the Ulvenwald, right? So had we allowed them to turn the Shifting Woodlands into an Omniscience, we were probably in trouble. So fortunately we got there with 1 damage to spare. In the games we just played, the deck really showcased what makes it so powerful. It has all the tools to be able to play aggressively against some types of decks and win a race, while also having the resilience to be able to sit back and play more patiently where it makes sense. Knowing that you're far more likely to draw an impactful piece than your opponent if they're on a more aggressive game plan allows you to dig your way out of games when you've gotten behind without sacrificing too much of your board state. The deck does have a couple of tough matchups, and I want to talk about them specifically, but fortunately, they aren't very prevalent in the meta right now. First is It Charbelcher. Oftentimes that deck just kills us too fast, and because it doesn't do it with pieces that we can easily interact with, sometimes we just have to be okay with that. In that matchup, we're just going to try to get as much damage as we can as fast as possible. Also, against some colorless Eldrazi decks, if you get to a point where they've landed a Chalice of the Void on 1 or 2 and have a Forsaken Monument in play or something similar, you might as well concede, you're not coming back. Finally, against blue-white or Jeskai control, we often get placed in a dilemma. Do we try to race out quickly to a win and risk a board wipe clearing everything we've built, or do we try and build patiently, unfortunately letting them develop into a state where we really can't outvalue them any longer? It's a really tough call, and it's going to come down to what you have in hand each game. However, if you pilot this deck correctly, you should still have a decent win rate against each of those decks, and that's made up for by the fact that against the rest of the meta, you have a huge advantage with this build. So thanks so much for watching, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, either about how the list is working for you, or changes you might think make sense right now. In either case, or if you just want to vent about how frustrating this deck is to play against, leave a comment below or message me on Instagram, because that's still the best way to get a hold of me. Hopefully this video gave you a better idea of how to pilot Boros Energy, or perhaps how to beat it. In either case, good luck on Arena this month, and until next time, let's win some more games together.